The release of Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, is expected to shine more light on the life of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She alleges Epstein and sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell forced her to have sex with Prince Andrew on 3 separate occasions when she was a teenager. Prince Andrew denies the accusations. Now, Dr. Cindy McCreery is an associate professor of history at the University of Sydney. She joins us now. Dr. Sydney, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, first, what was your initial reaction to the memoir's release today, and were there any key revelations that surprised you?
Good evening, Johnson. Look, I think that the publication of this memoir, which has been expected, is nevertheless shining a very damaging light on the life not just of Prince Andrew, but more broadly about what the royal family and the palace knew in previous years. As you mentioned, Prince Andrew has always strenuously denied even meeting Miss Giuffre, but there's more and more evidence mounting up that seems highly unlikely. And there are increasing calls in Britain and elsewhere for him to go to the authorities and to talk about what he knew and what he saw. And I think that this is a moment that could be a tipping point for royal privilege and royal secrecy. In other words, that this is a moment that I think the British royal family is really going to have to come clean about what they knew in the past, what protection, privilege Prince Andrew was given, but more importantly, perhaps for the future, about what steps they'll take to ensure greater transparency in the future.
Now, late last week, Prince Andrew relinquished the use of his royal titles and honours and is no longer known as the Duke of York. Now, can you explain why can he still hold his title of Prince, and can that be removed?
Yeah, so just to clarify, those titles of Duke of York or the Order of the Garter weren't stripped from him. He voluntarily agreed not to use them, but technically he still holds them. The title of Prince is somewhat different in that while the Order of the Garter and the Duke of York were titles bestowed upon him by his mother as an adult in his lifetime, he was born a prince through his birth to a monarch in Britain. However, even that title could officially be stripped, but for that to happen, that actually needs an act of parliament. There is a precedent for that in British history. His great uncle, Edward VIII, who abdicated the throne in 1936, was stripped officially of all his titles. But at this stage, all that's happened is that Andrew has voluntarily, if you like, agreed not to be known by the titles that he holds, rather than being formally stripped from him, and he still remains a prince.
And can he be expelled from his place in the line of succession?
Yes, that requires an act of parliament. But again, as in the case of his uncle, great uncle, Edward VIII, it is possible, but it does need legislation through the British Parliament. But it also, of course, needs the authority and the agreement of the monarch, namely Charles III, his brother. And this is, I think, something that would be a highly radical move. It's not impossible, but it is something that could be seen to backfire upon Charles if it is seen that he is acting, for example, vindictively or out of personal gain for himself. So I think it's very much a radical step. And we don't see any indication that the palace is at that point yet.
Now, Cindy, we know that Prince Andrew's not a working royal, but does he still kind of lead a relatively normal life?
Yes, so he has no longer been a working royal since 2019. He's not being paid as a royal. However, he inherited a great deal of money privately from his mother, and he uses some of that money to fund what is a lavish house on the royal estate at Windsor. And he pays the rent on that house. He's a tenant. Otherwise, he lives relatively quietly. There's another series of scandals that he's been caught up with recently in Britain, which is the so-called Chinese spy scandal. The questions remain about his role. He was a member officially of a British promoter of trade for many years, but he no longer holds that position. So he's really living privately, but this is living privately in a very luxurious home that's in the middle of a royal estate. And so even if one says, well, he's lost his privileges, in practice, I think it would be quite difficult and somewhat of a spectacle were the police, for example, to go to his home and try and bring him in for questioning. So he still remains highly protected and privileged to an extent, for example, that his nephew, Harry, who's long pleaded for more protection, no longer has.
Now, the Metropolitan Police, with the support of Buckingham Palace, is actively looking into the claims about Andrew seeking information about Virginia Giuffre, including her social security number. What is the likelihood of a police investigation?
I think the police investigation will go ahead. I think where questions remain is the extent to which Andrew will cooperate with that, although the palace has urged him to do so, as have senior British politicians and British media in recent days. However, at the end of the day, I think it would be difficult to proceed without the cooperation of Andrew. And to date, he's not shown any indication that that's something that he really wants to do.
Now, we do want to stress that the Prince Andrew denies the accusations.
Yes.
But lastly, King Charles. Now, he'll be meeting Pope Leo at the Vatican this week. Do you think that this scandal will overshadow the visit?
I think it has a high probability of doing so. It's not just a scandal or the publication of the memoir this week, but we also have to remember this is the week that's seen the very successful No Kings protests in the United States. Now, those are not protesting King Charles, they're protesting Trump. But nevertheless, this is a moment when I think many people are querying the power and privileges of monarchs or people who act like monarchs. And I think that draws unwelcome attention to Charles, just as it does attention to Andrew.
Dr. Cindy McCreery, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you for having me.